Hello guys, welcome to a new chapter in this course. This one will be about creating and designing a character. In particular, this subchapter will brush over the actual character creation stage and the things that I'll bear in mind going forward. Most of the videos in this chapter will have a part where I myself go through the process of designing and sketching a character according to the steps that I mentioned. I'll be referring to the process of creating a character from scratch, but it's perfectly fine if you already have a character in mind and want to follow along with that instead. This is a compilation of things that I think are important to consider, especially when applying them to a main character or one you think you might use and draw a lot. To start with, I want to split types of creator into two main categories so the tone is set. These are loose frameworks that I've seen in practice and used myself, and I'm not implying you can only do one or the other exclusively. The first one is the character designer. Now, the character designer is exactly what it means. Essentially, it's the person that designs characters based on ideas they already have for their visual or requirements that state what it should look like, without a lot of context or backstory to it. Story for these characters tends to be an afterthought or not to be there at all, or developed from the design itself. The character designer is more likely to have a lot of characters, highly distinguishable by design, and create and engage with new characters easily. They may emphasize things like color theory, silhouette, and design principles, and in general make their designs usually somewhat or entirely unique. For the character designer, if it looks good, it works. The second type I identified is the writer. That's the category in which I tend to fall more often than not, though again I don't think anyone is 100% one or the other. The writer, as the name implies, tends to create the story first, then design the characters based on the roles and context they are already inserted into. There is a bigger initial emphasis on the in-world justification for design choices and a more practical approach to props and traits. This is what I mean when I say it's a more down-to-earth type of framework. It's driven by factors that don't necessarily depend on the visual side and constrained by them too. In this sense, if it works, it looks good. The reason I brought these two up was to motivate you to think about what type of process you're better equipped for, or which one you tend to do, and to see if you could explore both. Personally, I'm almost always a writer type of character designer, and so that's the one I'll be focusing on this course. If you're a writer yourself or interested in learning how to explore that framework, I've listed some of the things that I consider when creating a character to serve as background and inspiration for this chapter. This, of course, is no proper universal guide, it's just my personal mind map that you might find some value in or take something from to create your own. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the world. Assuming there's a story or a character's background, this is the where it is set. For this, I've gotten a little bit more into world building, which I'm definitely not an expert on, but sometimes very passionate about. Since I'm working on a comic and the format isn't too friendly towards a lot of world building intricacies, I tend to brush over a lot of these aspects, but at least consider them in passing, as a skeleton of sorts for the main setting of the story. Whether you need to go in depth on any of these depends on you as a writer and on your story, but in general, these are things that I consider, pretty much arbitrarily split into categories. For starters, the nature stuff. Here go biomes, plants, animals, natural surroundings, etc. Then we get people stuff, where I included population aspects like density and composition. Note that race here is listed as a nod to fantasy settings where you can get fundamentally different humanoid races and the likes. Composition could be how many of them you have. Then I've got culture, religion, things that might influence the character's habits, aesthetic, antics, etc. Then I have society stuff, which could technically still count as people stuff, but I thought I'd split it to point out aspects like historical context, political and economic systems, etc. It's generally useful to have an idea of whether your main setting is at war or in peace, whether it's big, small, closed off, boroughs, etc. Lastly, I've got knowledge stuff, where I just put magic systems, technology, science, etc. These will obviously affect what the character looks like in context, and even things like how they grow, age, etc. I personally like having a general idea of these things when I'm designing a character, since they'll influence and inform my decisions in terms of what they're wearing, what they look like, what their body type is, etc. The influence isn't linear, but it's good food for thought. Moving on, some aspects related to the character themselves. World aside, on a more granular level, we get the character's backstory, i.e., how they got to the place where they are right now. What was their upbringing like, what their social status is, or how it's come to change throughout their life, what their family life looks like, what level and type of education they've got, etc. This is more about creating a character than just designing them, obviously, but it might be very useful for the visual design too. For instance, say you have a character that used to be wealthy and now doesn't have access to the same level of lifestyle. They may presently still have items of clothing or accessories that throw back to a time when they were richer, but with obvious signs of wear and tear that they couldn't afford to patch up anymore. Then we've got the character, the who. This part goes into personality, age, experiences, education, etc. Arguably, this is the base and the most prominent influence for most character designs, but I didn't list it first because I chose a sort of top-down approach to this subject. Of course, there's no set order in which to think about these things, and personally, I go back and forth between them all the time for any given character or storyline. So here we've got personality traits, personal experiences, etc. After this, we've got surrounding characters, with whom. This can work in a few ways. It might influence the character's experiences, tying into the previous section, in the sense that they might have specific attachments to certain people that lead them to act or look a certain way. Or it might work on a more superfluous level, say, if the character is part of a group of people with common physical traits, jobs, roles, etc. Or if you purposefully want to create contrasts and similarities between them and other characters. Last but not least, the story. Does the character have a story they'll be a part of, or one of their own entirely? Does this story have a specific conflict or set of conflicts? What role does this character play in them? All of these can affect how your character looks, or even the amount of different looks they have throughout a time span or a storyline. This is particularly relevant for people working in comics or anything that requires a narrative attached to a character's visual aspect. And these are the main factors I tend to consider when creating a character. To exemplify, I'll give you a rundown of how they apply to the character I'll be designing this chapter. I've already got a loose story for this character to be inserted in, and a project I plan to work on in the near future. The main character is already designed, and this new character will be secondary, but not by much, as they'll be the two central figures in the conflict for the most part. World-wise, the setting is a mix of futuristic, cyberpunk and dystopian vibes, and this is one of those cases where I'm brushing over world-building details that won't be important for the characters or story. Character-wise, this character and the main character both grew up together as childhood friends of sorts, and eventually worked together as agents of sorts as well. Right off the bat, they've got a lot of common elements that make me want to give their design similarities and common features. However, personality-wise, this character will be very different from their friend, also calling for contrasting features here. While the friend has a colder, more dismissive demeanor, the character I'll be designing is more effusive, expressive, and emotional. That'll be the main gist of the things running through my head as I designed them. As a last note to close this video off, I've got this little diagram here illustrating 4 different ways one can go about designing a character. There are others, obviously, but these are the 4 main ways I've seen and done it. They're placed by order of chaos, with the most chaotic being the one at the top, and the bottom one being the most organized and probably beneficial in the long run. To quickly run you through these, first one, with maximum chaos, is designing a character the first time they show up in a comic, in the very first panel they're featured in. I probably don't need to explain why this is a bad idea in general, but funnily enough I do tend to do this a lot, due to time constraints and occasionally just laziness. When working on a tight schedule, I advise cutting corners wherever you can, but this is an absolute last resort. The second one is the one I use the most, which is designing a character directly in an illustration that has a story or a scene behind it. This isn't detrimental per se, and I personally think it helps me get in the zone of that character better, since there's usually context to the illustration already. It's detrimental in the sense that sometimes you might invest a lot of time into an illustration like this, only to realize that's not what the end design will look like, or it might not have the best angle, expression, or perspective to allow you to fully understand the design and be able to reproduce it in other situations. The fact that I use it the most is purely a personal preference, and I don't think it necessarily makes your life easier or your work more efficient. The third one is closer to what I'll actually be doing this chapter, which is essentially doing a few preliminary sketches with different shots, angles, expressions, etc., just to get a quick, fully rounded idea of what your character looks like from different perspectives. It's probably the most balanced out of these options, and one I can definitely recommend since it strikes a good balance between being quick, fun, and effective in its goal. I've done this a few times, but it's sadly not how I tend to start designing characters. Always a good exercise for characters you already have though. The last one is a proper character sheet. This one probably has more use to you if you're an animator or going to be passing your design around to different artists and need to ensure it remains consistent across the board. It should have a character turnaround, maybe an expression sheet, different outfits, color palettes, etc., and essentially be a proper design document. Confession time, I've only done this for a school assignment once and I never really thought about it again. Personally, it's just not for me and it can make designing a character feel too much like a chore and set people aback. All in all, I think the second to last option is more sustainable, but again, it is a personal preference in the end. That's what I wanted to tell you in terms of background and inspiration for characters. Next subchapter, I'll be talking about anatomy and how to design it. See you then!